Power rarely collapses when it is weakest. More often, it fractures when it believes it finally knows what it is. History tends to tell the story of Spain as a rise and fall measured in fleets, gold, and wars, an empire that surged across oceans, then faded under the weight of decline. But that framing assumes power breaks from exhaustion. It overlooks a quieter tension, a tension inside belief itself, inside how authority understands who it is meant to be. This is a story about power and about identity, about how civilizations begin to harden around an idea of themselves, and about what happens when that idea becomes difficult to revise. The focus here is not a timeline and not a catalog of victories or failures. It is a recurring pattern, a way in which political authority, belief, and meaning begin to reinforce one another until adaptation feels like betrayal. Spain offers a clear case, but not a unique one. At the height of its reach, Spain did not merely rule territory. It claimed a moral position in the world. Power was fused with belief. Authority was not only administrative or military. It was justified through faith, lineage, and inherited order. The system was coherent. It explained itself. It offered stability. The Spanish monarchy did not present rule as a flexible arrangement. It presented it as continuity, as inheritance, as something already decided. The idea of empire was bound to a vision of Catholic order, of divine hierarchy, of a world that made sense because it had a center. This produced strength. It also produced constraint. When belief becomes the architecture of power, change begins to look like corrosion. Adjustment feels like surrender. Doubt feels dangerous. The system protects itself not only through force, but through meaning. Across the 16th century, Spain accumulated wealth at a scale few societies had seen. Silver moved from the Americas into European circuits. Authority expanded outward. The structure appeared stable. Yet the logic underneath was already tightening. Power was increasingly expected to look a certain way, speak a certain language, defend a certain order. The empire did not only govern territory, it defended an identity. This is where a subtle pressure emerges. When authority defines itself through moral certainty, it becomes less able to tolerate ambiguity. Complexity begins to register as disorder. Difference begins to feel like threat. The system narrows even as it expands. Religious unity became inseparable from political loyalty. Dissent was no longer simply disagreement. It became deviation. Belief was no longer interior. It became administrated, watched, enforced, a mechanism of control that also promised stability. At first, this arrangement appears efficient. It aligns power, belief, and order into a single direction. It reduces friction. It simplifies legitimacy. But it also limits the system's capacity to adapt. Spain's institutions increasingly oriented toward preservation rather than adjustment. Authority was inherited rather than negotiated. Prestige mattered more than productivity. Appearances carried weight even when material conditions shifted beneath them. This was not hypocrisy in a simple sense. It was coherence taken too seriously. As trade routes shifted, as other powers experimented with finance, administration, and tolerance, Spain's system resisted alteration. Not out of ignorance, but out of conviction. Change would have meant admitting that the old structure was not sufficient. That admission carried symbolic cost. Power, once stabilized by belief, becomes reluctant to revise itself. It begins to defend its own image. This creates a pattern seen across civilizations. When authority binds itself to a fixed identity, adaptation starts to look like loss. Flexibility begins to resemble weakness. Stability becomes an aesthetic rather than a condition. In Spain's case, this tension expressed itself through policy choices that favored continuity over responsiveness. Economic structures remained rigid. Social hierarchies hardened. Innovation was often viewed with suspicion. The system preferred loyalty to experimentation. Over time, the gap between symbolic authority and practical capacity widened. The empire still spoke in the language of universality, but its mechanisms struggled to keep pace with a changing world. Control remained the goal, even as control became harder to exercise. This is not a story of sudden collapse. It is a story of pressure accumulating quietly. The more the system insisted on its permanence, the more fragile that permanence became. The idea of Spain as a divinely ordered power could not easily coexist with uncertainty. Yet uncertainty kept arriving. Economic strain, administrative overload, external competition, internal fragmentation. Each added stress did not immediately break the structure. Instead, they exposed its rigidity. Belief, once a source of coherence, began to limit perception. The system struggled to recognize new conditions because recognition itself threatened identity. Here, power reveals one of its quieter patterns. It often fails not because it lacks strength, but because it cannot reinterpret itself without losing coherence. Meaning becomes a constraint. This is not unique to Spain. It appears wherever authority confuses continuity with truth, wherever order becomes a moral requirement rather than a provisional arrangement. Over time, the mechanisms meant to preserve stability begin to generate instability. Control produces resistance. Uniformity produces fragmentation. Certainty erodes flexibility. The empire does not fall apart in a single moment. It thins. Its confidence becomes ceremonial. Its structures remain, but their internal logic grows brittle. The form persists longer than the function. What once unified begins to divide. At some point, the question quietly shifts. Not whether the system still holds power, but whether it still understands the conditions that produced that power in the first place. This is where the pattern turns inward. Because the tension at the heart of Spain's experience is not only historical, it points towards something more general about how humans organize meaning, about how belief becomes structure, about how systems defend their own coherence even when the world changes around them. When identity becomes tied to order, any disruption feels existential. The desire for stability becomes a desire for control. And control, when pursued long enough, begins to limit perception. The past does not repeat, but the structure of this pressure recurs. Civilizations build systems to make uncertainty bearable. Over time, those systems acquire authority. Authority hardens into identity. Identity resists revision. The cost of revision grows. Eventually, the system protects itself from reality rather than responding to it. This is not failure in the dramatic sense. It is a narrowing. And that narrowing raises a quieter question, one that does not belong only to history. If power depends on belief, and belief depends on coherence, how much uncertainty can a system tolerate before it feels threatened by change itself? At what point does the need for order begin to outweigh the need to understand? The pattern does not accuse, it does not warn, it simply repeats. Across empires, across institutions, across moments where authority becomes certain of its own necessity. The record suggests that collapse is rarely sudden, more often, meaning thins first. Flexibility fades, control remains, but understanding weakens. What remains outwardly solid may already be inwardly constrained, and that leaves a final tension hanging in the background. Not about Spain alone, or empires in general, but about the way humans bind identity to structure. If belief once made power coherent, what happens when coherence itself becomes something that must be defended? And how often does the need to preserve order quietly reshape what we are willing to see? If you found meaning here, you're welcome to explore more on Timeless Questions, where we examine history not for answers, but for understanding.